that as a result of some discussions we have had over this past week, the Global African Congress is taking up a campaign in Canada of activism around this issue. And we have drafted a letter to Prime Minister Trudeau and a statement, a call for decisive action against the Dominican Republic, so the statement goes into all the background, but it ends by saying it is against this background, therefore, that we are calling on the Government of Canada to, one, issue an official pronouncement on this matter, which makes it absolutely clear to the government of the Dominican Republic that the government and people of Canada unreservedly deplore and denounce this ugly manifestation of anti-Black and anti-Haitian racism. Send a clear message to the government of the Dominican Republic that the continued existence of this discriminatory policy will have negative implications for the continuance of trade and economic relations between Canada and the Dominican Republic. Demand the immediate cessation of the deportations. Insist that the government of the Dominican Republic agree to the establishment of an internationally supervised process for the determination of the nationality and legal status of the remaining dark-skinned residents of the Dominican Republic in order to remove the anxieties of this segment of the Dominican population. Insist upon the establishment of an international committee to determine compensation for all persons who were illegally displaced by the mass deportation that was carried out directly or encouraged by the government of the Dominican Republic. And 7, send a fact-finding mission to both the Dominican Republic and Haiti in order to investigate the magnitude of the plight of the dark-skinned Dominicans of Haitian ancestry who are still resident in the Dominican Republic, as well as the plight of those persons who have already been deported to Haiti. So the Global African Congress is going to lead that effort, and I think there's going to be a request for people and organizations to sign on to that document. So the third principle is that knowledge of our history. You know, if we're going to pursue reparations, we have to know the history. So if we're going to be, this is what we are telling the Caribbean governments as well. If you say that you're engaged in a campaign for reparations, then you have to underpin that with a program to equate the Caribbean populations with their history, the history of pre-colonial Africa, the history of African enslavement, the history of the post-emancipation period. Teaching of the history. So that has to be a priority issue. You can't pursue reparations if you don't know the history. All right? Completion of the emancipation process. The point must be made that the racist oppression of Black or African people did not end with the formal abolition of slavery. Indeed, after the abolition of slavery in the 19th century, our historical oppressors deliberately entrapped our ancestors in economic, political, and social arrangements that were designed to handicap them and to serve the interests of the former enslavers, arrangements that have persisted in modified form down to the present day. The struggle for reparations must therefore be, among other things, a struggle to expose and put an end to such arrangements and to complete the emancipation process. So we are saying reparations is not just about something in the past. It's also about identifying all of those structures that still hold us back, that still disadvantage us today, exposing them and removing them. Okay, I'm told I have to wind up, so I'll just read the headings of the others. The other principles are that compensation must be proportionate to the crime. Number 6, reparations must produce the just society. And this is where I say the CARICOM program does not go far enough. The campaign for reparations must be designed to produce the just society. It must be formulated as a demand for a fundamental transformation of the currently existing inequitable and exploitative economic and power relations that exist in the international arena and in many of our domestic societies. This principle has implications not only for the restructuring of such international entities and phenomena as the UN Security Council, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the terms of international trade and finance, but also for the manner in which our domestic African and Caribbean societies and governments function. Implicit in the demand of our Caribbean and African governments for reparations must be a commitment to themselves deliver justice to their own people. And this is a commitment that the masses of African and Caribbean people must be prepared through dynamic activism and advocacy to hold our governments to. So reparations is also a tool that we use, even in our advocacy with our own governments. Because you can't say that you are pursuing justice for black people, but at the same time doing injustice to your own black people. So it's a tool that we have to use creatively. It's not just about making a demand for some resources from somebody, right? It's something, as a tool we have to use to deal with our current reality as well. 7th principle, no one must be left behind. I think this is a very important principle. You know, when our ancestors were brought across that Middle Passage, they all came on the same slave ship as one undifferentiated mass. At the bottom, they were deposited in the Caribbean islands, at the bottom, the very bottom of a structure of oppression. Some of us have been fortunate, have managed to extricate ourselves to some extent. But when we look around, we see brothers and sisters still languishing in those slavery-type conditions. And what reparations says is, like any good army platoon that goes out into battle, you don't leave anybody behind. So we are not leaving anybody behind. We came here all together as one exploited mass, and we are not leaving anybody behind. So reparations is that mechanism by which we reach down, and those brothers and sisters who are still in those conditions, we lift them up. We Africans must exercise autonomy throughout the process. We must repair ourselves. It's not only leveling demands at the liable governments, it's also an internal, how do we repair ourselves? Psychologically, psychically. How do we remove any vestige of notions of white superiority and black inferiority? How do we remove that ourselves? And we must engage in that self-repair, because it is self-repair that will generate mass support for reparations. Reparations will only succeed if it becomes a mass movement. And it will only become a mass movement if sufficient number of our people repair themselves, get a new understanding of who they are, get a new appreciation of their history, where they came from, what they lost. So that's very important. Reparations must be a broad movement. The campaign for reparations must be designed, on the one hand, to bring on board with us all of our natural allies in Africa and the diaspora, Latin America and Asia, and to enlist the tremendous weight of world opinion on our side, and on the other hand, to isolate and publicly hold up to international embarrassment and critique all those entities that perversely and unreasonably seek to deny and resist the manifest justice and righteousness of our claim to reparations. This will call for a concerted effort in the field of international diplomacy by the ambassadors, embassies, and foreign missions of the nations of the Caribbean Community, African Union. It will also require consistent effort at the General Assembly of the United Nations, the Organization of American States, the Commonwealth, and in other relevant international organizations. Just like how we were able to isolate at that preparatory meeting in Chile, we were able to isolate United States and Canadian governments. We have to do that on a world scale. It must be a worldwide movement. It must be a worldwide movement, and it will call for international diplomacy. I'm saying to the Caribbean leadership, look, you know, we have the CARICOM Reparations Commission, we have the national committees. Even our embassies must be seen as part of that reparations infrastructure. And if we are serious about reparations, then the Barbados consulate here can't only be concerned with people of Barbadian ancestry in Toronto. No. If reparations is now part of our official governmental policy, it means now you must have a concern for all black people. For all black people. And so we need to build that reparations infrastructure, inclusive of our embassies and consulates. Recently, the University of the West Indies added an important component of that infrastructure when they launched the Reparations Research Center at the Mona campus in Jamaica. The other principles are that the mass of our people must be intimately involved. And, you know, so we are saying, part of my problem with the CARICOM thing is there's no provision for a reparations fund. And how are you going to have reparations without a reparations fund? We're not just asking for developmental